Well, a few years ago, I met with Yitzhak Rabin, who was then Prime Minister of Israel, and I said, "What is it you want?" He said, "I want a peace treaty. I want a peace treaty." And what happens is, whenever Israel is winning, the nations of the world come together and call for a ceasefire and stop them from actually getting a peace treaty. And that's what's been happening now, as Hamas has been pouring rockets down from the West Bank all over Israel, as far as Jerusalem and north of Tel Aviv. And now the world community says, oh, it's time to stop. Wendy.
All right, well, diplomatic pressure is starting to build for a ceasefire, even though Hamas still has thousands of rockets left. Chris Mitchell has the story from the border between Israel and Gaza.
In 7 days, Hamas has fired nearly 1,000 rockets into Israel. To stop those rockets, Israel has hit more than 1,400 targets during Operation Protective Edge, now ending its first week. On Fox News Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defended Israel's actions.
With this kind of enemy, we'll take whatever necessary means that we need to take. I tell you, Britt, we try surgical action. We're not indiscriminate. It's very tough. There are always going to be civilian casualties, which we regret, but we have to defend our people, and that's what we'll do.
On the diplomatic front, the UN Security Council issued a non-binding resolution asking both Israel and Hamas to cease fire. On the ground, Israeli troops continue to mass on the border, while the IDF expanded its military operation into northern Gaza. As part of its effort to minimize civilian casualties, the IDF instructed the people in northern Gaza behind me to evacuate the area. They said a campaign would come that would be short and temporary, but designed to eliminate the rockets being fired from that area. They sent leaflets that said in part, the civilians are requested to evacuate their residences immediately. Those who fail to comply with the instructions will endanger their lives and the lives of their families. During the week-long campaign, nearly 180 Palestinians have died in the attacks. Israeli officials blamed Hamas for the deaths by putting their civilians in the heat of the battle.
And we are telling them, get out of the house. This house is going to be targeted. It is used for Hamas infrastructure. And Hamas is issuing exactly the opposite orders. Stay in the house. Defend the house. So, of course, we are doing whatever we can to avoid hitting civilians, but in the fog of war, with these kinds of instructions from Hamas, accidents happen, and this is, of course, very unfortunate. But the international law is very clear on that. If you are involving your civilians in the combat, in the battle, then you take responsibility for the consequences.
On the Israeli side, the rockets from Gaza are nothing new. 26-year-old Costa has lived half of his life under the threat of rocket attack from Gaza.
So it's always in the back of your head. Like, I think that I don't remember myself. It's 13 years of my life. I'm 26 today. I don't remember myself doing nothing, like everything, without thinking, where's the closest bomb shelter?
Whether quiet comes to Costa, the goal of Israel's operation is to stop the rockets out of Gaza one way or the other. While the IDF prepares for a ground offensive, the diplomatic clock keeps ticking, and it remains to be seen whether there'll be a ceasefire before an invasion. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Israeli-Gaza border.
They've had ceasefires before, sponsored by the United Nations, guaranteed by this, that, and the other. The guarantees aren't worth the paper they're written on. And the same thing here. Israel has got to get rid of those rockets. It has to go in and finish the job. And regardless of the pressure from the international community, they have to do what they have to do for their own security. And those of us who care about the situation should support Israel in this. They need to put boots on the ground, knock out those rocket emplacements, and go all the way through Gaza and get the job done. They obviously don't want to take on the rule of Gaza. I don't blame them for that. Well, shifting now to another thing that could be settled if the president would take leadership. Here at home, both Democrats and Republicans say President Obama has the power to stop the immigration crisis. Well, will he do it? John Jessup has more on that story from Washington. Here's John.
Pat, members of both parties say it's up to the president. They say if he fixes an immigration law loophole, it could stop the flood of children pouring into the U.S. illegally. Dale Hurd has that story.
How to stop the surge against America's southern border by hundreds of thousands of undocumented men, women, and children from Central America. Texas Governor Rick Perry says it could have been stopped long ago if President Obama had wanted to or had been paying attention.
We called some 4 years ago for 1,000 National Guard troops to temporarily go to the border so that they could help push forward that show of force, if you will.
The spike in illegal children started in 2012, the same year that Texas Governor Perry first warned Obama about the problem. It grew again rapidly in 2013 and exploded this year. The crisis has once again raised questions about the Obama administration's competence. And many Democrats agree with Republicans that the administration could have done more by acting sooner. But a Texas Democrat says more soldiers on the border isn't enough.
Well, Governor Perry's just wrong on that issue. He wants to put more National Guardsmen, and if they put more National Guardsmen, the children wouldn't come. They're going to continue to come as long as those conditions exist, and we don't fix our broken immigration system.
The White House says it needs more money to fix the problem, $3.7 billion. But congressional Republicans say too much of that goes to housing illegal aliens rather than securing the border. A 2009 study showed that for $3 billion more, a secure fence could be built along America's entire southern border. Congressional leaders say the president could relieve much of the crisis without waiting for congressional action, which is likely to take a long time.
The president has tools in his toolbox that he can do immediately to stop this. So he needs to re-engage, get folks who are doing administrative work on the border. They need to make sure they send a very clear signal.
The president could go to Congress tomorrow and change a provision in a law passed in 2008, which plays a key factor in the current crisis, by letting Central American kids stay in the U.S. without being quickly deported. The law was intended to let potential victims of sex trafficking stay in the U.S. until a judge could hear their case. But that provision turned into a way for kids to end up staying in the U.S., since the court system is backlogged and some never show up for their hearing. Now Congress is waiting to see if the president will act. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
And Pat, while everyone is waiting, the crisis is still unfolding for those children and also for those communities along the border.
Well, we've got a situation of disease. We have staph-resistant tuberculosis. We have all kinds of diseases, scabies and so forth those children have. And they just can't be brought in. It'll shift the balance dramatically. It was a noble effort to think, okay, people are victims of trafficking. So they've come to this country, and therefore we need judicial proceedings before we kick them out. Okay, that's fine. You've got a young girl, she's 16 or 17, and she's being used for prostitution, and she's being mistreated by those coyotes. So that's a good law, okay. Well, right now that law has been used to give a blanket amnesty to everybody who crosses the border, and the president sent that signal that if you come across under these circumstances, you get to stay, and then your parents probably will come to join you. Well, all he's got to do is ask for that law to be rescinded, and the Congress is more than willing. They could have a session in one day in the House and Senate, unless Harry Reid decides he wants to block it. But the House would certainly go along, and hopefully the majority of the Senate would. It would be very easy to fix, but the president's got to take a stand, and he hadn't done it. And he doesn't want to take a stand. Either he's incompetent or he's got an agenda that doesn't fit with what's right for this country. John?
Pat, a school district in California is standing by its decision to ban any reference to God or Jesus in a high school graduation speech. Brooks Hamby thanked Jesus in his salutatorian speech last month, even though school administrators had taken out references to Jesus and the Christian faith in 3 previous versions of his speech. Todd Starnes of Fox News reports attorneys for the Brawley Union School District are defending its right to censor graduation speeches and ban any speech that refers to God or Jesus. The letter says it is well established in the Ninth Circuit and California that a public school salutatorian has no constitutional right to lead a prayer or include sectarian or proselytizing content in his or her graduation speech. You can find a link to Todd Starnes' column on our website at cbnnews.com. Pat?
I was privileged to found an organization called the National Legal Foundation. Later on, that has another one has come, the American Center for Law and Justice. And now we had a case called Mergens versus West Side School District that was argued by the in front of the Supreme Court by Jay Sekulow. It was a 7-2 win, written by one of the leading liberals on the court, saying that students had a complete right to exercise their religion as any way they saw fit, and they could not be restricted from doing that. Now, that's the Supreme Court, and for that lawyer in that school district to say it's well established with the Ninth Circuit is a joke. It's been overturned more than any other circuit in the nation, and whatever they may have held, it doesn't trump the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, again, Mergens, and I would refer that lawyer to Mergens versus West Side School District and see what the law actually says. John?
Pat, one of the highest level whistleblowers from the National Security Agency says the NSA is moving toward watching everyone. The London Guardian reports that William Binney told a conference in London, quote, "The ultimate goal of the NSA is total population control." Binney says the NSA is recording at least 80% of audio calls, and he tells the paper he's had indirect contact with some NSA employees who are disgusted with what the agency is doing. Pat?
I want to ask my lovely co-hostess, when you're making a long-distance telephone, does it ever occur to you that somebody's listening in?
Lately, you know, you start to wonder, you know. Of course, I don't have any, you know, top secret information.
But I mean, if you say something critical, you know, I just think the agricultural department is, you know holding the price too high or something.
Freaks me out is I have skylights in my house or in my roof. So you know, people have this Google search maps, and now I'm wondering if people can look in my house.
Well,
is that paranoid?
I think that's paranoid, but as far as telephone calls, the NSA is listening to everything. And, you know, it worries me, ladies and gentlemen. The Bible said something that in the book of Revelation, that they can't buy or sell without the mark of the beast. And that meant total population control. And I said, and I'm sure you have said, that's technologically impossible. There's no government agency with the technological ability to monitor what everybody does all over the country in terms of buying and selling. Well, right now, we have developed in Washington, D.C., an organization called the NSA that has enormous computing power beyond anything we have ever dared to dream possible. And this whistleblower was a high level in the NSA, and he says their desire is total population control. Now, if that doesn't scare you, I don't know what will. I am glad to know that they're going to stop terrorist plots and that kind of thing. But let's face it, we are losing freedom. Every telephone call you make can be monitored. Every internet communication you have can be monitored. And not only monitored, but stored in vast databases held forever and can be searched back and forth. This is not a good way for a democracy to act. We're a republic, not a democracy. But something should be done. I know we say, well, we don't want to get blown up by some terrorist plot. Well, of course not. But at the same time, I think we've got to put a lid on this. Who runs this thing? If ultimately this is in the control of somebody, who is in control? Are we going to give it to Obama? Is it going to be to Eric Holder? Are they going to be in charge? Will we give it to John Kerry, Secretary of State? Will we give it to the Secretary of Defense? Who's going to be in charge of all this? And who's going to be the control? Who's going to hold in their hands your future and your destiny? Who's going to do that? Well, we're setting up to a point where somebody will, and a high-level NSA official has just said that's what they're planning. And you think, that's science fiction. It is too bizarre to be contemplated. Well, it's happening. Let's raise a little protest against it. John?
Pat, it may be a hot summer here in parts of the U.S., but the Australian reports that Brisbane just hit its coldest temperature in 103 years at 37 degrees Fahrenheit, about 17 degrees below its normal temperature of around 54. And it's cold farther south, too, with one station in Antarctica recording its coldest June since it began taking measurements back in 1956. The region also hit a new record low of 31 below. Pretty chilly, Pat.
I've got to tell my good friend Al Gore that baby, you got a good movie, but you've missed it. Somehow, folks, we've got a globe, and we've got a top part of it called the North, and we've got a bottom part of it we call the South. And they shift, right now it's winter down south and it's summer up north. Okay, they're having winter, and before winter starts, it's the coldest really on record. That Queensland, Australia, that's had been 100 years or so, it hadn't been this cold. Now, how can we say this global warming when the Antarctic ice sheet is growing? Because it's colder. It's not melting. The oceans aren't flooding. And to spend these billions and billions of dollars on fighting global warming is just nonsense. But it's an accepted doctrine of the, the brie and cheese eaters, the brie and wine eaters, I should say. That crowd has decided that global warming is an item of faith. It cannot be challenged anymore. If you're in the academic community, you can't get promoted if you deny global warming. Well, it's cooling in the southern hemisphere, colder in Antarctic, colder in Australia. It means something. It means something. And we ought to stop spending all this money on trying to fight what isn't there. John?
Pat, here's some helpful news. A little prevention in the form of exercise can go a long way when it comes to preventing dementia and Alzheimer's. A new study from Cambridge University finds that moderate exercise, like walking 3 times a week for 20 minutes, can cut the risk of Alzheimer's nearly in half. Scientists believe that exercise keeps up the blood flow to the brain. In looking at various studies, the researchers found that exercise was the best way to keep your brain healthy. More motivation to keep it moving. Pat?
I hope moving on a horse counts on that. The horse does a lot of work, but you do a lot of work if you're riding big horses.
It's a workout. I've been very sore after horseback riding.
Okay, and so you don't have Alzheimer's.
Iowa's governor is calling for prayer around the country today. And the date 7/14 is being tied to a familiar verse in the Bible and a national prayer campaign. 2 Chronicles 7:14 calls for Christians to humble themselves, pray, and turn from their wicked ways. What a promise from God to forgive their sin and heal their land. Today's prayer campaign is being called If 7:14, and it urges Christians to set the alarms on their cell phones to go off at 7:14 every morning and evening as a reminder to pray twice daily for national revival. Well, Superbook has been a hit on the Cartoon Club channel in Thailand, and now CBN is using Superbook to reach children in local schools. More than 1,400 grade school students attended the first school event in Chiang Mai. One student said Superbook makes him want to know more about God, and it also makes him want to pray. Gizmo also made an appearance dancing to the tune The Salvation Poem, and the children received a special notebook with Superbook information. They also listened to an encouraging message about Jesus, and 361 children prayed the salvation prayer. That's awesome. You can find out more about what CBN is doing around the world by logging on to cbn.com/international.